Parents of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing a friend of your kid has done at your house? I'm the weird kid in this story. There was this kid I used to hang out with all the time. I used to go over to his house and we played video games for hours straight. This one time, me and another friend went over to his house to ask him if he wanted to come play with us. They weren't at home, but they had their cleaning lady in their house working. Now I can't remember if it is the lady who invited us in, or if we invited ourselves in given our familiarity with the place, but one way or another we went inside and helped ourselves with his video games, completely unaware of the weirdness of the situation that we are in. The lady even brought us snacks. They eventually came back to find two kids in their living room playing video games. His mom got upset with the lady, I think, but I do remember her calmly explaining us that it was not okay and we shouldn't be in their home again unless they are home. I really wasn't the brightest kid. For my daughter's birthday, which is in April, I typically invited her whole class to her birthday party. Each year the party was usually a cookout, and I would get a kiddie pool set up, and we always had a swing set and trampoline as well as yard games and toys. The kids would come over typically around 1 or 2 p.m. and stay a couple hours, eat, have some cake, play games, open presents and then leave. One year, when she was 9, a girl from her class was dropped off like all the rest and her mom said to have her call when the party was over and someone would pick her up. This particular year it happened to be spring break that week, so there was no school. The party ended, we called the various parents to pick up their kids and this particular child. We had to leave voice messages. Hours passed, all the children save that one had long since left. We continued to call and leave messages that all went unheeded. Night fell, so we loaned her some PJs, and it turned into a sleepover. Now, we are white and lived in the country. This particular child was black and apparently had recently moved into the area from a city. She didn't know us, had never met us, and had only known my daughter as a classmate for maybe a month. It didn't matter to me that she was black, it just seemed to me like that if I was a child left behind in some strange place with people I didn't know, that being a different race would only enhance the scariness. Nope, not this child. She was happy as a lark. Day 2 morphed into day 3. We continued on life, now with an extra child. We continued to leave messages on the only contact number we had. We went shopping, out to eat, carried on with our lives. The girl said she didn't know people lived like this out in the country. By day 5, we had debated on calling the police and reporting her as abandoned. We decided to try to find her house. She knew approximately where she lived, so we went and drove around and around the neighborhood until she recognized her house. An older brother was there and he let her in and didn't really say much of anything. The next day, her mom rolls up in the yard with the girl and 3 of her younger siblings. We had apparently forgotten her swimsuit when we took her home. The mom asked if she could leave the kids there while she ran a quick errand. I told her that unfortunately, we were getting ready to leave ourselves, and I was sorry. She got mad and yelled took off in a huff. Truthfully, I was afraid she was going to leave all the kids and just not come back. It was really weird how the girl just seemed to accept that no one was coming to get her. All the other kids I know would have been crying and hysterical wanting to go home. The girl finished out the school year and didn't come back in the fall. I guess they moved away. I grew up on a small dead-end street and we were the only ones with a pool, so we spent a lot of our summers in our pool. There was this one neighbor who weirded us all out. He was a hardcore druggie, and we found him passed out drunk in his pickup a lot. Well, his niece and nephew came to live with him because their mom died, so they started swimming with us too. The girl was older than most of us and also larger. A few times she decided it would be funny to push a few of us underwater and hold us there, especially me, since I was the smallest and youngest. We stopped letting them come over after that. Good question, Op. I haven't had any real creepy incidents as a parent yet, apart from the odd random friend exploring the house and finding their way in our bedroom, but I'm planning a camp out sleepover for my 11 years old soon, so I might have a good story then. In the meantime, when I was a kid, this strange family moved in a couple doors up from us and had a daughter around my age. She didn't attend school with me and was clearly intellectually challenged. She decided to be my friend, coming over all the time. even if no one was home. She was obsessed with my dog, a young boxer pup, and would play with her whether anyone was home or not. She would come into the house uninvited and find my mum on the toilet and casually chat with her. Poor girl had no social etiquette or anything. I truly felt sorry for her and would share my homework with her, but she couldn't read or write. We were probably 10 or 11 ourselves. Anyway, after about 6 months my mum was fed up with this girl coming and going and making herself at home. So mum approached her parents and tried to find out what the deal was. Mum could see an abused child a mile away and decided to call CPS. They were investigated and the girl was taken into emergency foster care. Mum couldn't take her in due to the proximity of her parents. Turns out they had been prostituting their daughter out to pay for their alcohol and she hadn't been in school since year 2. It was so horrific. We found out shortly after their landlord was evicting them for no rent payment. We received a death threat in our letterbox for my puppy, literally stating that since we took her daughter they were going to take something of ours. Police had to evict them, and 1 week after that, my little pup Jeddah went missing. Small town and the only red boxer, but she never came home. I'll never forgive them, but I hope their daughter got a decent life far away from those monsters. Not a parent, but I recall this very vividly. I was friends with this kid at my school, whose parents didn't really care for him. So when he all but invited himself over one weekend, his parents dropped him off with food on the street corner and just kinda left. Mind you, I have no sidewalk on my street, it's just ditches, and then a very heavily trafficked road. So he walked along the side of the road to my house and entirely expected to then stay for most of the day. When my parents called his parents to come get him, they made some excuse about how he'd said he'd be staying the night, which I'd never agreed to, and we forced them to come pick him up. When everything was said and done, it wound up being his 16-year-old brother who came to get him, who I later learned couldn't legally drive at the time. Maybe not creepy, but honestly a very weird and disturbing situation to find myself in the middle of. Not a parent, but this happened when I was about 11 or 12. I was sleeping over at a friend's house, let's call him Joe, and there was another friend staying over, Tom. Joe and I were upstairs in his room playing Sparks at like 10 PM. Went down to the kitchen to get a glass of water and see Tom sitting on a couch in the dark staring blankly at nothing. I was like, UHH, what are you up to, man? And he just straight up looks me in the eye and goes, I'm talking to my grandma. This dude's grandmother died when he was like 4 or something. Needless to say, I noped the fuck out of there. Never saw that kid again. Perhaps not creepy, and not entirely my kid's friend. My friend's kid. She was in a bind and didn't have anyone to keep her kids after school, so I told her they could come home with my son and hang out while she finished up her first day at a new job. First, her younger son, Q, is a bit on the spectrum, so has quirks in general. He hadn't been over before, but we had hung out many times, and he looked up to my son as a favorite friend, and the older son was good friends with my kid. We live in a crappy apartment in a very nice part of town, and Q acted as though he had never ever been inside an apartment. Many times he expressed how little it was, and how he couldn't believe that people in our neighborhood could have an apartment. Q also loves World War II, and told me many facts about generals. He was quite taken with Russia, and referred to it as Mother Russia, while using a terrible fake Russian accent. I happen to do an amazing Russian accent, which he loved, so if I wanted him to do anything, I had to ask it in the Russian accent. I also have decorated my apartment a bit whimsically, with a ton of animals and gnomes and other things sort of around in interesting scenes. My niece was over once, and counted my animal related things, and came to the conclusion that 23 animals live in my living room, but some are paintings/art. Q was distressed that they weren't named, so spent the afternoon naming most of them, but not cute as pet names, which is why I now have a gold dinosaur named Brian and a porcelain rabbit named Kevin, along with a few other adult male named animals that I can't recall. Brian and Kevin get asked after regularly, though, and my son still occasionally remembers to call them by their name, even though this was over a year ago, and Q has only been over again one time since then. Obligatory, I'm not a parent, but this is something me and my parents talk about to this day. I had a slumber party in first grade and invited probably 8 to 10 girls. Can't remember how or why, but we all ended up in the bathroom. One of the girls has to use the bathroom, so we all walk out, except one girl. She stood there and shit on my bathroom wall, right in front of the other chick. Her excuse? The other girl was on the toilet and she couldn't hold it. Girl was a fucking weirdo to begin with. She ended up being my roommate last year and was just as fucking strange and 10 times more annoying. My daughter had a friend come around when she was 7 or 8. This girl was pretty odd and obviously used to getting her own way, but the weirdest thing was one day when I was in the kitchen and they had been playing outside. I'm renovating our house and there were no baseboards, so you could see under the house. It looks creepy as an adult, but kids have vivid and wild imaginations. They come running in and she grabs a sharp knife from the kitchen drawer. I stop her and ask her what she's doing. My daughter says they are going to kill the monster under the house. I tell her to immediately put that knife back. But we need to kill the monster. And then they both start to run out again. I very firmly tell her to put it back. Now, she does. We told her mother about it, but she is not very good at the whole parenting thing. I shudder to think what could have happened. Not a parent, rather, I was the kid in this story. My mum got engaged to this rich guy whose daughter was a couple of years younger than me. Growing up she had practically every animal she'd ever asked her dad to buy for her, but over the years once they eventually died, she buried them in a corner of their backyard. One day she showed me the little rocks she had put on top of their graves as makeshift tombstones. I suggested that we dig up the bodies so we could see what they looked like. She said no and afterwards ended up coincidentally staying at a friend's place every following weekend that I was due to stay at her dad's place. Sorry Ash. No parent, but as a kid I'd have this friend that would kill small animals, try and shove my little sister down the stairs, and do all sort of twisted stuff. Needless to say he ended up in jail for robbing a place I think. Guy wasn't fully there. Didn't come from a broken home or anything either. His parents were absolutely lovely. Still talk to his parents to this day. Him, not so much. Not a parent. This happened to me as a kid. I was sleeping over in a friend's house, Andrew, with another friend, Armin. So we were playing video games and shit till late. Andrew sleeps in its own room as it's his house and my other friend and I get to share a room with a big bed. We were like 14, so it felt a little weird as straight teens. We are there just awake talking, and we begin to hear some weird noises, like some white noise and some faded voices, and then white noise, and then a little music, louder and lower and louder again. We rise and go to face the music, and in the living room there he is, our friend just wearing underwear, placed on his knees playing with the buttons of the radio at 3 AM completely asleep. We ask him, "What you doing man?" "Yeah right." Then he turns and screams, "I'm creating magic." We thought he was possessed or something, and we went straight to their parents' room, and they told us he sometimes sleepwalks. When we come back to him, he is just sleeping in the floor and they walked him back to bed. A girl came over to my house, and it comes super psychopath I want your life shit. This girl I knew from first grade came over for a sleepover. We must have fought over something, because I went up to my room. Because I got so mad at her, I forget why. It must have been big though, because I'm not one to march out on a guest. Anyway, while I'm upstairs crying, I see in the mesh pocket of her away bag a bright pink Easter egg with some fur stinking out of it. And I realize I hear faint squeaking. I go over, pick up the egg, and it's warm and shaking. I open it, and my pet mouse like explodes out of there. I'm absolutely horrified. I see in the bag all of my favorite toys and some of my clothes. She took them and squirreled them away in her clothes to try to hide them. I go downstairs with the Easter egg, ready to absolutely raise hell with my evidence, only to see my mom in the kitchen quite shaken already. There she is, looking down at my pet guinea pig in its cage, nose bloody, right front paw torn off, and obviously dead. This kid was sitting on the couch watching TV acting like she had no idea what happened. In less than 1 hour this kid brutally murdered my pet, tried to take another one for later, and planned to take my favorite toys and even some of my clothes. My mom was like nope, sent me to a friend's house and drove that kid home, because she wasn't waiting for her parents to come get her. When my mom talked to her about it, while in the car, she said the girl said I just wanted to be like her. Never saw that kid again. Hope she's safely locked away somewhere. I was 4 years old and my first cousin tried to get me to give him a blowjob several times. I didn't like the idea because that's where pee comes from, so I told my parents. He was around 9 at the time. Her mother, my aunt, dismissed it by, well, he must have learned it in school, don't pay attention to it. A different incident came between our families and I haven't talked to them in over a decade. Can't say I'm devastated. Hope I'm not too late to the party, but when I was a kid I used to have to hang out with my mom's co-worker's child. We couldn't afford a babysitter, so sometimes my mom would babysit us and sometimes the co-worker would. We were like maybe 9 or 10, but it was very apparent that this kid had no sense of what authority meant. His mom would give him anything he wanted. He basically controlled her like if she were a puppet and he had the strings. The kid also loved to get very physical, and this was annoying because I was a small kid when I was little and very weak, so I stood almost no chance. The kid would push me, attempt to punch me, and quite literally attack me out of the blue, and since his mother had no control over him, I basically felt alone. He got really into WWE and started trying to perform all those moves on me, so he tried flipping me, and honestly it felt like I was always on the defensive. I ended up learning how to mentally manipulate him as he wasn't the brightest. This meant that I would constantly derail his thoughts by mentioning movies, games, or literally anything that would mentally stimulate him until I was out of harm. I actually got really good at this and ended up being able to manipulate the mom into getting us McDonald's or Burger King by planting that seed into the kid's brain, which he would then yell at his mother until she followed his command. It honestly taught me at a young age that people can indeed be manipulated and that sometimes you don't need to be stronger than someone to defuse a situation.